Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of Theme Park Appreciation. Now, if you haven't seen this series before, don't worry, I'll explain it a little bit. I like to take a look at parts of themed entertainment experiences that often go unrecognized by the typical guest. Today, we're going to look at vehicles that are part of theme park attractions and how they might not move in ways that we would expect. We're going to do a case study of Universal Studios Hollywood in Universal City, California. Universal Studios Hollywood didn't open until 1964, which is almost a decade after Disneyland opened. The park opened with a couple of exhibits about filmmaking and, of course, the world-famous Studio Tour. Now, over the years, the Studio Tour began to get new additions that were created specifically for the tour, which kind of turned it into a true ride. But remember, this episode is all about how vehicles in theme parks can behave differently than you would expect. And in 1988, Universal Studios Hollywood did something with its tram tour that hadn't really been done before. Now, before I go into talking about the addition to the tram tour, I kind of want to go over the premise of this video. There are certain expectations that you get from different vehicles that you might sit on in a theme park. So, for example, if you're sitting on a roller coaster with over-the-shoulder restraints, you fully expect that vehicle to be part of a thrill experience. It might even go upside down. But if you're sitting on a vehicle with lap bar restraints on a bus bar type ride system, like an old-fashioned dark ride, you expect it to have a slow-moving or at least more subdued experience. So back in the 80s, if you got on a tram tour and there were no restraints, you were just sitting down on a bench in the fifth car back of a slow-moving tram, you didn't really expect much to happen. The vehicle would react the same way you would expect a car to if the car's top speed was 15 miles an hour. Most of the things at this tram tour were happening around you, but not to you. Sure, you passed by an animatronic version of King Kong, but you were watching it outside of your vehicle. In 1988, all of this changed with the creation of Earthquake, the big one. The attraction promise was simple. You drove onto a studio tour in the backlot and experienced an 8.3 earthquake. In order to simulate this earthquake, there were floods, fires, sparks, trains flying, cracks, and even a street collapse from the fictional street above you, but all of these things were happening around you. In order to put you in the story, to make you feel like it was happening to you, your vehicle was placed on a motion base. Now, the audience or the tram riders in this case, they had no knowledge that their vehicle was being placed on such a base. All they knew was that the tram drove into a studio and they just thought they were in a set. Now, today, the tour guide, he may or may not tell you what you're about to do when you drive into the studio, but suffice it to say, I believe that most guests in the 80s did not know what they were in for, or even if they knew, they didn't know everything. Now, this motion base was very limited in how much it could move because of the vehicle. Because the tram cars, they still needed to be connected to one another, and the tram needed to be able to drive in and out as soon as the experience was done. Despite this, though, the rocking back and forth of the tram vehicle was unexpected, and it was game-changing. It allowed storytelling to be done in a new way, an innovative way. The next two experiences I'm going to talk about did not originate at Universal Studios Hollywood, but they eventually saw their way over to this California park. The first experience I'm going to talk about is Transformers: The Ride 3D, which opened at Universal Studios Hollywood less than half a year later than its original incarnation, and it opened at Universal Studios Hollywood in May 2012. The ride vehicles in Transformers were an evolution of something we've already seen at Universal Studios, with one major exception. When Islands of Adventure opened at the Universal Orlando Resort, it premiered with an attraction based on Spider-Man. The vehicles that were developed for the attraction were bus bar type vehicles, which meant that they traveled along a bar in the ground, but they also had the ability to tilt side to side and to turn Now that's a huge oversimplification, but the vehicles of Spider-Man the Ride, they deserve their own video, and I'm sure there are hundreds of them on YouTube. One of the problems with the initial design of these vehicles was the space that the attraction took up. It had to be huge because of how large the vehicles were, how big the queue was, how big the sets were, and how far away they needed to be from the vehicle to make them convincing. So when it was time to develop the next iteration of this ride, Transformers the Ride 3D, Universal Creative and Oceaneering Entertainment Systems, who were the people who actually built the vehicle, they had to find a way to make an experience that was just as immersive as Spider-Man, but created over a decade later. It needed to bring more thrills. It needed to somehow fit into an area that also took up less space. That's crazy. Now, I was once told that the definition of creativity is designing within constraints. And size constraints are some of the most constricting ones out there. So if you can't build an attraction out to fit the same size show building, where do you build? Now, I'm about to reveal a little bit of the secret to the attraction, so if you don't want it spoiled, skip ahead. I don't really care. So instead of building out, they decided to build up. Transformers the Ride 3D was one of the first e-ticket attractions to be located on 2 floors without any sort of hill or incline to get you from the first floor to the second. So if you start up on 1 floor, how do you end up at the top? Spoiler alert, you do it in an elevator. Now my guess is if you speak to 99% of visitors who go on this attraction, they won't know that it has an elevator. And the funny thing is, it doesn't just have 1 elevator, it has 4. So why in the world would you build such an expensive piece of hardware, build multiple of them, for an effect that the guest doesn't even see? Well, there's a couple reasons here. One is just a practical one. If you could have an attraction on 2 floors, it can take up half as much space. So next, there has to be a reason in the story. As it so happens, part of the story of the attraction is getting you from the ground level of a city to the top of a building, and then there comes a time at the end of the attraction where you fall down. During these moments is where the elevators are. Think about it. Now, you don't know you're in an elevator because there's a screen that wraps around you to cover your field of vision. But if you ever go on any of the Transformers attractions, turn around during these scenes and you'll see that you are indeed traveling between different floors of the building. This mechanism is so cool. It's almost like Tower of Terror at Walt Disney World and Disney's Hollywood Studios if the Tower of Terror was somehow invisible to the guest. It's awesome because it's unexpected. Now, the last example I'm going to talk about is pretty short because I'm only going to talk about one section of the attraction. But, of course, it has to be Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, which opened at Universal Studios Hollywood in 2016. There have been a lot of videos talking about the genius of this attraction and the attraction vehicle, but just as a little bit of an introduction, if you're not as familiar, the attraction is about you traveling on a broomstick with Harry Potter, and the vehicle is a modified version of the Kuka arm, which is a robotic arm that gives you insane degrees of motion, and it travels along a bus bar on the bottom. Unlike Transformers, though, you can't see the bus bar. When you get on the attraction, you are sat on what appears to be a floating bench with the vehicle hidden behind and below the loading area. Unless you are looking to see it throughout the attraction, you don't see the vehicle that you are sitting in for the entire length of the attraction. This makes the magic of the attraction so magical. The first time you're sitting down and you begin to fly upwards and backwards and side to side, you have no idea how it's being done because all you can see are the sets in front of you. I don't really think this has ever been successfully accomplished before in a theme park where you can't physically see the vehicle that you are in. That's crazy. I mean, think about that. That's so crazy. So anyway, I talked a lot today. What I'm trying to get you guys to appreciate is how the vehicles that are part of attractions at theme parks are A, not often what they appear to be, but B, they might be placed on a motion base that gives you more movement. They might be placed onto an elevator that allows for more thrills, and they might even be hidden out of sight to allow for more magic. With new themed entertainment experiences coming out at an increasingly fast rate, theme parks and themed entertainment venues, they need to give you a reason to want to experience an attraction. And better yet, to experience it multiple times. The best way to do that is surprising you. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to this video. If you like it, please let me know. And if you want to see a different type of video or you don't like it, let me know that as well. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one.